Welcome to the Digital Campus Podcast with eCampusOntario, the show for educators and learners who are participating in and shaping the future of higher education in the digital era. Each episode features insightful conversations with leaders in education and other experts to bring you valuable perspective and strategies for navigating digital pedagogy in higher education today and tomorrow. The Digital Campus Podcast is where innovation meets higher ed.
Hello, and welcome to the Digital Campus Podcast with eCampusOntario. I'm your host, Robert Luke. In this podcast series, we are exploring the issues and challenges of transforming higher education in the digital era. In this episode, we are discussing one of the hottest topics facing today's educators, the impact of generative artificial intelligence, or generative AI. We're going to explore emerging evidence and best practices related to the use of generative AI, its impact on aspects of pedagogy, such as assessment, and we will address the academic integrity concerns of integrating Gen AI to enhance learning outcomes. Here with me today to talk about this are two experts in the use of AI in education. Amanda Macniak is Associate Dean, Teaching, Learning, and Program Quality at Durham College, where she guides faculty development and pedagogical leadership. Welcome, Amanda.
Thanks for having me, Robert.
And Dr. Chris DeLuca, Associate Dean in the School of Graduate Studies at Queen's University and a Professor of Educational Assessment at the Faculty of Education. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Robert. Great to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to have this conversation, and I'm delighted that you both have joined us here today. So I'm going to get us going by asking both of you a basic question. How have you seen the landscape of higher education change with the integration of AI or artificial intelligence? And what inspired your interest in exploring its impact on learning and assessment? Amanda, do you want to start?
Sure, no problem. It's fascinating because when I think back to where we were at this point last year, the landscape is drastically different. So when we came back from the holiday break and Gen AI, or specifically ChatGPT, had really hit the educational market strong and hard with very little warning, I guess, to a lot of our educators. We came back to faculty that were, a lot of them were in I guess we would say a state of distress almost. I affectionately refer to it as Chicken Little syndrome. You know, the sky is falling. Education will never be the same again. We're never going to know if our students are actually meeting their learning outcomes. How are we supposed to assess them if we can't guarantee that they're actually doing the work? And now, I think over time, as people and faculty and students have become more comfortable and explored the different options out there, I'm actually starting to see more faculty interested in investigating ways that they can actually incorporate generative AI into their teaching and learning practices and into their assessment practices. So sort of more in that embracing it mentality. And there's some excitement around it too. We look and it seems like 100 new Gen AI apps show up every day. And so there's no way that we can possibly stay on top of them all, but it's nice to see faculty who are finding certain ones are getting excited about it and they're sharing that information with others. So we've really landed into this amazing educational revolution that we probably haven't seen the likes of, at least in my lifetime, and probably many, many lifetimes before that. And it's an unprecedented time where we see this mass challenge to what it is that we do and have been doing for years upon years since, the invention of the essay. And now we're really having an opportunity to revisit, critically reassess and reevaluate what we do as educators and how we assess our students. And it's actually really quite exciting, and thinking about how they might use these things in the world of work and how we might integrate that. So for me, from an assessment and a pedagogical perspective, I'm really seeing faculty starting to tiptoe out of their comfort zones in regards to this is status quo and how I've been doing it for the last 10 years, and looking at different, more authentic ways to not only teach students, but also assess students and help them progress in a positive, productive way through their education instead of testing them for a moment in time.
Well said. I love the point of, well, first of all, that it certainly was very sudden when ChatGPT came on the scene. But your point about like one of the biggest inventions or disruptions since the essay, and I'm reminded of the root of the word essay is the French essai, which means to try. So trying stuff out seems appropriate. Chris, how about you? How have you seen the landscape of education change, and what inspired your interest in exploring the impact of AI?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. And thanks, Amanda, for getting us started. I think certainly much of the same experience, certainly a rapid sort of frenzied response initially where AI seemed to come out of nowhere, at least in the educational space with ChatGPT, although we have all been using AI tools and technologies and it's been interfacing with our lives for a very long time. But in education, it has transformed the way we need to think about assessment, teaching, and academic integrity in the past year, certainly due to ChatGPT. And what I found interesting is sort of the clashing perspectives that institutions have taken with respect to ChatGPT and AI tools. So you have some institutions that have tried to almost bar it or not allow it or find ways to narrow its scope, and others that are truly embracing it and saying, how can it be part of the learning landscape and how can we really enable it as a new digital literacy tool for our students? And so as we continue to move down that learning journey, as Amanda sketched out for us, I think we're hopefully seeing more institutions gravitating towards the ways in which AI can be part of the learning landscape and how we can use it productively. My personal interest in it is my background in assessment as an assessment researcher, and in particularly thinking about assessment innovation. So how do we do assessment differently, positively, and productively in classrooms and teaching and learning spaces? And AI has really sort of stimulated that conversation in a new direction. So I think about it as a productive disruptor for much of the traditional assessments that have been happening in our classroom spaces.
I love that term, Chris, a productive disruptor, because it's not something that you hear very often out there. It's generative AI is disrupting what we're doing. But if we can get people to frame it in that way and really embrace it as being something that is beneficial and can really support what we're doing in really positive ways, then yeah, it absolutely is that. Exactly.
It is a great turn of phrase. And Amanda, you had mentioned about the impact on work as well. And I'm reminded of a thing I saw recently, which somebody had said, you won't lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to somebody else who uses AI.
Yes.
So it really reminds us that we need to figure out, and Chris, to your point, we've been using AI for quite some time. We just didn't really realize it. And it's a good segue into maybe asking you a question, Chris, about co-development with students, because you talked about, working in the classroom. And how has this collaborative approach influenced the design and implementation of AI-driven tools in the classroom? And what benefits have you observed? And benefits for both educators and students?
Yeah, so for far too long, assessment has been this black box in teaching and learning where the instructor designs the assessment, grades it, and then students just get their grade back. And there's a whole bunch of things that happen between when the student writes their assessment and when they get their grade. And so this whole idea of co-designing assessments with students and even co-designing the evaluative criteria with students is a really powerful concept to allow students into that black box and allow them to see what are the things that I'm being assessed on, how can I do better at my assessment, and it becomes a productive pedagogy onto itself. And so that's no different when we have AI in the picture. So inviting students into the conversation about what their assignments are all about, how are they going to be assessed, what is the evaluation criteria, allows them to say, how can I use AI in this assignment task as well? And being explicit about it. I think one of the challenges we see in the higher education landscape is we're using blanket policies like you are permitted to use an AI tool or you're not permitted to use an AI tool. When we get into the weeds of an assignment, we start to articulate how you can use that AI tool. So let's just take the classic example of writing an essay. You can use the AI tool to sketch out the outline of the essay, or you can use it to draft the first version of your essay, but then you need to annotate and articulate additional next steps to that essay, or you can use it to edit the essay. So being clear with students as to how they can use the AI tool and having that conversation with them when they're building the assignment task and the evaluation criteria becomes an empowering conversation for the use of AI in their learning. It also makes clear and authorizes the AI tool within the classroom, which right now is part of the challenge as to why we have so many breaches of academic integrity, is that our students are using AI in part because they don't know when they can't use AI.
Right.
So this helps sort of open up something that is otherwise pretty close to students in their process.
Well, that's fascinating, Amanda. It sounds to me, or seems to me rather, that there's a interesting corollary for the faculty that you work with who are coming to learn how to use it as well. Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. We have some really amazing educators that have really jumped on board and investigated the different ways that we're doing it. One of them is doing really fantastic work around leveraging generative AI to, I guess, become a person or an individual as part of a case study where a student then interacts with it. It's for marketing. And then the instructions to the generative AI indicates, well, based on these types of questions, these are the types of responses that you need to give as if you're this type of a person. And so it's really giving students the opportunity to take the skills and the knowledge that they've learned in their classroom learning experiences and apply it in a more practical situation where it's almost becomes a type of choose your own adventure type of assessment strategy where you're actually seeing a cause and effect type of an interaction between the student and the generative AI and seeing what the resulting output is for that. And then, even working with the output after the assessment is over as a reflective piece for students to extend and learn extend their understanding and further learn from it, then you have this amazing scaffolding effect that's happening.
Oh, it's quite striking. And both of you are making a very compelling case for considering AI as a full participant in the pedagogical enterprise, if I could frame it that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amanda, maybe just following on then, talk a little bit more about assessment. And here I want to ask you a little bit about embedding formative assessments in instruction. Certainly, Chris, you were mentioning this as well. And how does embedding formative assessments enhance authentic and alternative assessments? And what role does AI play in creating a more dynamic and responsive learning environment?
So formative assessments are a really important sort of checkpoint to see how students are progressing in their either development of a skill set or development of a knowledge base, or being able to integrate or synthesize things together. And I am a huge fan or a huge proponent of summative assessments that are structured from or built from formative assessments. And so using generative AI, like Chris was talking about, to, draft an outline for an assessment that you might then fill in the blanks or fill in the meat and potatoes, for lack of a better explanation, for it, and then submitting that as a formative piece of work. And then you get the feedback on it. And students can then take that feedback, revisit, revise, and correct whatever it is that they need to correct, and then resubmit it as part of their formative or their summative assessment, my apologies. And for so long, we have been in this space where assessment is a black or white. Do you know the answer or don't you know the answer? And if you don't know the answer, here's your test back. Good luck. Go look it up. We're not going to approach this or talk about it again. And if we can start using formative assessments to really grow student capacity in terms of their understanding what it is they're able to do, But not only that, nurture the productive failure piece of things. And our students really have this, or a lot of our students have this mentality that they have to get it right from the get-go. And that's counterintuitive to what the whole point of education and learning is, right? One of my mottos I live by is an error is only a mistake if you don't learn from it. If we don't give students chances to make errors, those corrections, and then revisit it with them again, they're not learning anything. And so being able to leverage generative AI to help support us in those bits and pieces of a summative assessment will allow our students to not only see the importance of the work of the formative assessment that they're working on, but really allow them to grow and blossom and see the importance of what it is that they're doing relative to their own understanding and how they're going to take it outside of the space. And Gen AI can do some really fantastic things in that area. We have some of our students who struggle with a large task or a large assessment. Put the assessment into a Gen AI bot and tell it to break it down into 5 steps for you, or 10 steps, or 2 steps, whatever it is that you need it to do to be able to help you develop and formulate your response or your assessment product in a way that is understandable and beneficial to you. Or even allowing or encouraging our non-native English language speakers to actually put their assessments into generative AI in the language that they're most comfortable with, and then have that submitted to the professor as their deliverable. And then we take it and we put it into Gen AI and have it translate it to English for us, or vice versa. Encourage our students to input the assessment instructions and have it convert it to the language that they're most comfortable with. Think about the comprehension and the comfort impact that would have on our international students or our non-native English language speakers.
Well, it's well put, and it strikes me that formative assessment are like the milestone markers along the way of the educational path. And Chris, you mentioned similar things when you talk about structured assessment. So how about you? What do you think about the role of formative assessments and Gen AI?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of formative assessment. The overarching goal of formative assessment is to look at the goal that you're striving toward and to close the gap between where you are and where you want to go. And so, as Amanda mentioned, Gen AI can help you do that. It can help say, this is where you're at, and here are some steps to scaffold your learning to get to your end goal. And it can also give you some strategies. And all those learning strategies are part of formative assessment. And also part of formative assessment is feedback from instructors, feedback from peers, feedback from self. But now we're also thinking about feedback from the machine, feedback from the tool. And so it's just enlarging the various spaces that a student can actually integrate feedback so that they can continue to move towards their learning goal. And so I think we're just enlarging that space. The important piece of this conversation is to have our instructors and our students see the value of engaging in formative assessments. Too often, we don't value them. We only value the summative, and there's an emphasis on the summative. And so I want to just underscore Amanda's point that these are not disconnected assessment activities, that they are working in service both for student learning, and the formative works to support actually greater gains in summative assessment. So when we do formative, we should see greater achievement in our summative because those are connected assessment activities and connected learning goals. And we need to be comfortable with that.
That's well said. And I'm struck by the phrase you used, Amanda, with the comforting. I can't actually remember the exact phrase you used, but the comfort that comes when you're feeling supported in that educational journey. Formative assessment being one of them. And I love the fact, Chris, that you were just talking about, the machine is one more point of feedback in addition to instructors and peers. That's nicely put. And I think might help to allay some of the anxiety that we talked about at the very outset, that certainly a lot of educators have felt. Amanda, you said this directly when the faculty come to you there. At first it's like they're in denial. It's like, oh my goodness, we don't want to see this. How can we ban it, Chris, to your point, right? Let's prevent it from happening. So maybe I'll ask both of you this question, and I'm really interested in how can educators navigate the integration of AI in assessments to ensure academic integrity is maintained? And are there strategies you found effective that help to mitigate these potential challenges? Amanda, let's start with you, please.
This is the $1 million question. And it's something that we hear from faculty on a daily basis. So how can I prevent students from engaging with generative AI for this particular assessment? And going back to my comment earlier that every day there seems to be tons of new or improved or revised generative AI tools out there. How can we possibly construct assessments to mitigate the use of all of these things? Some of them are even coming out with browser plugins that will get around things like our learning management systems, and which is now making things a little bit more interesting. And so for me, what it is it's now a challenge to the educators. And we have to start thinking again outside of that box. We're so, in many cases, structured in how it is that we assess. We've been doing the same thing for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years or more. And asking faculty to step into a world that they are maybe not familiar with or not familiar with how it's going to be used on the outside is the cornerstone of this. So faculty really need to feel supported in what it is that they're doing, having people that they can talk to, colleagues they can share ideas with, experiences that they might be able to leverage from others and seeing how other people have responded to it. Interestingly enough, this is sort of the area that my PhD research is in, and how to move through that academic integrity space. And I guess the crux of it is focusing on how the Gen AI can be used, not focusing on how to prevent it from being used. And we're never going to be able to accomplish that. There's always going to be something that will be like threatening that authenticity or the accuracy of that assessment. And so thinking about how this student in this particular program might be asked to use generative AI when they move into the world of work, or how they might see it in terms of progressing through learning a skill set and leveraging that. And so I wish there was a black and white answer to say this is how you mitigate academic integrity concerns with generative AI. But the broader answer is we have to focus first on the process, not the end product, and that will help support the use of Gen AI. But then also we can't beat it, so we have to figure out how to join it. And for every faculty member, every subject area, that's going to look a little bit different. Right. And so really challenging faculty to step outside and explore, right? Try something new, see how it goes. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So we move on and try something else. So I guess that's the challenge piece of things is challenging the faculty to step outside of their comfort zone.
Which I'm sure is a difficult thing to do if you're an expert in something and your job is to know something. It's hard to be you're the one doing the assessing, and suddenly you may feel assessed in that regard. So
yes.
Chris, how about your perspective on academic integrity and what strategies you found effective in mitigating challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think Amanda's right. This is the $1 million question. Everybody's asking it. Students are asking it. Faculty are asking it. And administrators are certainly asking it. But what's interesting for me is that academic integrity is not, and breaches of academic integrity are not new. We've been facing them for a long time. Gen AI maybe has increased their likelihood, but students have been engaging in plagiarism and finding ways to do that for a long time. And so, we seem to have a heightened concern around it. but this has been an issue that we've been facing in our institutions for a while.
Right.
What I think is new, though, is how we need to be more proactive in our response to it. And so we've been doing some thinking about this at Queen's and in other spaces, and we tend to think about it in three ways. One is being declarative around the authorized use of Gen AI. So when and how can students use it in their courses and in their assignments? And so this is back to Amanda's point, this notion of let's enable its use, but let's be clear on where it is appropriate and where it's not appropriate to use it. Because if we don't set those boundaries in place, that's where we're going to probably actually have a slippery slope when it comes to detecting and also making a case against the student or for the student. The second principle that we tend to lean on is transparent use, which is when somebody is using AI and when it's permitted to use, what evidence are they showing us that they've used it and then gone beyond the output of AI? So how are they documenting its use? How are they citing its use? And what artifacts are coming from the AI tool that is part of the assignment? And so we are integrating it and we are seeing it. And then we're saying what additional is coming from you, the student. And then explicit conversations about originality, original work. So that we're saying student work, student thinking can't just be the sole output of a Gen AI tool. It needs to go beyond that. And so having those explicit conversations about where can AI support your thinking, but then what does it mean to author work? And why is it important to author work practically and ethically? And so making that an explicit conversation in our higher education courses and contexts.
Well, rendering tacit knowledge explicit is one of my favorite sayings as somebody who is schooled in human-centered design. And it's actually a good segue into another topic I'm really interested in unpacking. And Chris, I'll ask you this first. And specifically, I want to ask about learning outcomes. And we kind of talked around this, but I want you to really dive down and be explicit. In what ways can AI enable students to demonstrate more complex and valued learning outcomes? And how can educators leverage these capabilities for a more enriching educational experience?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Robert. I quite like it because we tend to have a mindset where if Gen AI is in play, that means that students can't engage in additional learning, or we can't, assess the basics, or learning needs to stop at a certain level. And that's just not true. What we know is that AI is good at offering some thinking around ideas levels learning, or that if we think about Bloom's or some of those other cognitive models, sort of the lower level complexity of learning. It can offer some outputs around sort of medium level complexity, but it does struggle at the higher levels of complexity. And it certainly can't engage in what I would call the uniquely human capabilities of learning. And those are particularly establishing connections to community, engaging in collaboration, and demonstrating creativity. And so when we invite our instructors to design assessments that have those components to them, the student might engage AI for some of the base foundational knowledge, but we invite students to then go further with their thinking and their learning and demonstrating their learning. We invite students to make the learning more personal, more authentic, and more collaborative. And so you can see that play out in a number of ways where we maybe have them think about some facts about climate change or about any topic really, and then say, now put that into action within your community. Devise a plan to engage with a community group and see how this knowledge that you were able to look at and mine from AI translate to something you do within the context of practice. And so we translate knowledge, or we apply knowledge from ideas to application to an authentic experience. And I think that's really part of making assessments more innovative, more authentic, and more human.
That's a great explication of the concept of an authentic assessment. Really cool. I like that a lot. Thank you. And now, Amanda, how about you? You mentioned already like transition into the world of work, and that people will be learning how to work with AI. So in what ways can AI enable students to demonstrate these learning outcomes? And how can educators leverage those capabilities?
There's a lot of ways, and I think there's a lot of ways that are still left to be explored. But Chris, you talked about the personalization piece and that personalized interaction with the Gen AI bot, and I think that is the key. And so asking students and thinking about their ability to extend what it is that they're learning in the classroom, and taking a complex concept and using generative AI either to provide concrete examples at the current level of understanding, and then asking students to take those examples and extend them or apply them to a new and novel context can really help. Or building those novel contexts into an AI prompt to figure out what the response is relative to whatever it is that they're learning in the classroom. So again, returning back to a marketing example, if I am trying to devise a survey where I'm trying to get information from a very specific demographic of individuals, what types of questions do I need to ask? And if I ask generative AI and see the responses I get back, then it gives me the ability to say, okay, so I need to revise my language in this one. This didn't quite get to the answer I was looking for. So it gives students the opportunity to reflect on what it is that they're know and how they're applying what it is that they're actually knowing. And giving students the opportunity to choose. So giving them options on maybe a case study that's more meaningful to them, or doing some research that they might take into the field or into the community, like you were talking about, Chris, that's about something that's personal to them, either from a cause perspective or from an employment perspective or from a personal perspective, and seeing how they can take what the output from the Gen AI is and applying it actually in the learned physical or external environment is a really, really key piece of being able to leverage AI. And we can really capitalize on that choose your own adventure type idea. And I know that there are programs out there where, depending on how well you answer a question, the difficulty of the next question or the next scenario is dictated by the detail and the complexity of your response. And so we can use Gen AI easily to help students progress through that, extend their learning and understanding, or take a step back, go into that sort of just-in-time teaching space, give them a concrete way to solidify their learning and understanding, and then continue stepping forward. So it really allows that process to be personalized for that student in the learning space.
These are just great examples of ways in which we can demystify AI. We've seen everybody's seen a lot of news stories, and for quite some time now about, we don't know how this AI works, but it comes out with this answer. And it strikes me that what you're both talking about is an excellent way to demystify the technology in a way. We might not know exactly how the algorithm works, but when we get used to using this as a tool, then we get to be more productive, I suppose. Now, both of you had some great examples for how things can be used, or how AI can be used in various teaching contexts. And I wanted to ask you, like, if you had to share your favorite example to date, of course, I know this is a work in progress, but what is your favorite example where Gen AI has been successfully implemented to enhance learning outcomes in higher education? This could be something you've done, it could be something your colleague has done, or something you read about. But Amanda, let's start with you.
I don't know if I could choose one. I've got two examples that are at different levels, I guess, is probably the best way to look at them. In an introductory type level, if we're looking at teaching students communication strategies. So for example, professional email writing might be an example. And I actually saw this online and I thought it was absolutely brilliant, and figured out a way to translate it into the classroom. And so there was a mother who actually asked generative AI to write an email to the teacher at school to excuse her daughter for illness, but she asked the Gen AI to write it in the style of Moira from Schitt's Creek. And so this email explaining her child's absence was generated completely in a way that you would expect Moira from Schitt's Creek to, speak. And so actually, it was just earlier today that I was speaking to some faculty members around what a great way to introduce professional email writing by having them actually ask a Gen AI bot to write an email about a certain thing in the style of their favorite movie character or TV show character, whatever, and exchanging that with a partner to evaluate the contents. So are all of the key points included within the email? But what a fun way of doing it instead of just looking at this boring professional email. So that's a really great sort of introductory connection activity that faculty can easily do. And it gets students working with the Gen AI, but it also increases sort of the interest and the engagement in something that might be otherwise a little dry.
Injects a little fun, I guess.
Exactly. And my other example is this amazingly complex assignment that one of our brilliant marketing professors has put together, where the students are working on a marketing strategy for a new product. And the prompts that are being put into the generative AI is shaping how the student is interacting with it. So he will tell the Gen AI, okay, you are going to respond to this individual's questions as if you are, a 50-year-old world explorer who's just stopped in this big city and you happen to stop them on the street. And even to the point where the students are only allowed to ask, say, 5 questions. And the Gen AI then is programmed, so to speak, to give a response to say, okay, I've answered enough questions for you now. I have to get on to my next thing. And taking the information that's produced out of the Gen AI and then applying it to a marketing strategy by using the Gen AI as different samples of different demographics. And it's a pretty amazing thing to hear and see. And so he's really, really embraced having the Gen AI as an active teaching partner inside of the classroom.
Oh, that's nicely said. Chris, how about you? A favorite example or two of the use of Gen AI?
Yeah, it's hard to pick a favorite example. And, I was just thinking this is a great question to even ask Gen AI to come up with examples of how it can be used in these contexts. And it would probably do a great job at that. I don't know if this is a favorite example, but I think it's a classic example. And so I think it's worth sharing. And it goes back to sort of the English essay or any written task, right? That we ask students to do. And the go-to response for some students is put it into Gen AI. And so, instead of then saying, well, there's a breach of academic integrity, actually build into the assignment that we want you to go to Gen AI to generate a response to this task. And then from there, the actual assignments is a metacognitive or critical thinking task, which is to analyze the response of the Gen AI output for personal connections, for accuracy, and for connections to the course content. And so here we're doing things that the Gen AI can't do on its own, but we're inviting the student to actually extend their learning, engage in critical thinking, which is a higher order thinking, and engage with the content and show that they actually understand the content in a deeper and more personal way. And then actually submit their annotated version of the Gen AI output. And that's the assignment, is that more critical analysis of the essay. And so I think that, it pushes against the notion that we can't use Gen AI and we can use it and then build off of what it's generating in a very classical, traditional assignment that we continue to use.
Well, I love that. I mean, it's almost a recursivity of cognition in a way that, would you use the AI to look at the critique of the AI? I mean, you could keep going through that.
You could keep going down that cycle. Yeah, absolutely.
A little bit about mise en abîme, but I love the way that you're articulating. Well, both of you are articulating, first of all, the use of Gen AI as an effective pedagogical tool, but that kind of metacognitive aspect of saying, well, did the AI hallucinate when it, is that a real reference? Maybe you should go and check check its work, kind of thing. And this is a fascinating examples. So let's switch for the last couple of minutes to a couple of rapid fire questions on the futures. We do a lot of research and foresight here at eCampusOntario, and we always talk about futures plural. Right? We look way down into the distant futures, and we say, well, there's many things that are possible. So I've got two futures questions for you both. The first one is, and we've talked a little bit about this, but if you had to articulate the challenges and the opportunities of Gen AI that you foresee in its continued integration in higher education, how can institutions effectively navigate these dynamics? So, Chris, let's start with you.
Sure. So I think one of my favorite quotes in this space is from UNESCO, and they say, currently there is no universally recognized institutional framework on the ethics of AI, particularly in relation to education. And why I like that is because we've been preoccupied with a practical response to AI in our higher education context. What do we do when there's a breach of academic integrity? How do I change my assessment practices? How do I ensure students are engaging it appropriately? And I think we do at some point, once we've moved out of the frenzy stage, as we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, actually step back and say, what is the ethical underpinnings of this tool within our educational spaces, and articulate or excavate some of those ethical principles. And I think once we begin to do that, we'll probably actually have a better runway for its use within our teaching and learning spaces. And then the other, I think, challenge that's before us is to recognize that this AI technology is on the move. It is generative and it continues to adapt and evolve. And so what are our best practices today might be less good practices in 1, 3, or 5 years from now. And it requires us as educators within these spaces to have a mindset to evolving practice and evolving assessment practice. And so this really speaks to our assessment literacy capacity as educators. And when we look at research on assessment literacy, older notions say that it's how we think about assessment and how we practice assessment. And newer notions of assessment literacy actually think about an educator's orientations, beliefs, dispositions, background, agency in the area of assessment. And so I think the challenge before us is to empower our educators in college and universities and other educational spaces to actually take control of the assessment process and not just rely on historical practices, right. And have some literacy in that area to be able to navigate this evolving terrain.
Well said. I love the concept of assessment literacy. Amanda, how about you? The challenges, the opportunities, how can institutions effectively navigate these dynamics as we head towards that kind of future?
Yeah. And I think Chris definitely hit the nail on the head right there around the continuing evolution of generative AI. And as I had said previously, there's no way that we can stay on top of every Gen AI tool, bot, task that's being done out there. And so from a challenging perspective, institutions really need to make a determination over what battle they want to fight in regards to generative AI and what are the most important pieces of it? What is it that we want our students to get out of it? And how do we want to see our faculty engaging with it and our staff engaging with it as well? And as part of that, there's two pieces. And Chris, you were speaking about the ethics around it. And as part of that is the confidentiality or the personal information that is potentially shared within the Gen AI space, and really giving our students the tools to be critical consumers of not only the outputs that are coming out of the generative AI, but what the Gen AI is asking as an input. And so where is that information going? What's happening to that data? What type of information is being stored? What is it that's being built from that information, and who's responsible for it once they sort of put it out into the Gen AI space? And from the challenging perspective is really making sure that those within our institutions are aware of the pieces and being those critical consumers of what it is that they're doing in terms of that interaction. But I've seen some pretty amazing opportunities happen. And so both the OECD and HESA have sort of launched Gen AI or AI observatories where they're gathering data on policies and supports and resources that are being generated globally in response to generative AI coming into the higher education space. And what a way to join the world. And there are so many places where we have sort of existed in isolation or silos, or this was the North American response and this was the European response, and so on and so forth. And now we're seeing everybody sharing and borrowing what people are doing and willingly handing out, here, we developed this. Why don't you think about using this in your space? And the amount of research that's going into this that's now hitting the academic space is astounding. And you're really seeing countries that wouldn't necessarily engage in research around, say, academic integrity per se in the past, really starting to step into that role. And so I think it's a really wonderful opportunity to unite higher education around the globe and really share practices on what people are doing and understand that we're not alone in this. And so everybody's facing the exact same challenges and the exact same opportunities for this. And so let's work together and just make this sort of global higher education system something that is supportive of all students, all faculty, and really helps promote student learning and development in a way that is universal in nature.
Well said, and a nice antidote to some of the downsides and the darker sides of AI that we've kind of talked a little bit about. So I'm gonna, in the last couple of minutes that we've got, I'm going to ask you to talk about the other side then of the challenges and to like a future vision, if you will, because it's a rapidly evolving landscape as we've already discussed. And I'm really interested in, in say 30 seconds or less, where you see the future of AI and in higher education heading, and what's an emerging trend or innovation that particularly excites you? Amanda, let's start with you.
I think the biggest thing we're going to see is Gen AI as teaching partners. And so not just a tool that's being used in the classroom, but as something that is really going to work alongside the faculty and perhaps even be able to fill in spaces or gaps that the faculty may not be able to enter into, either from a higher order perspective or not being able to gather the information, but really using it to not only offload some of those cognitive tasks that are more mundane and can be supported in a way that the faculty doesn't necessarily have to engage in it. The Gen AI can do some of that work, but also an interaction back and forth. Hey, I was thinking about doing this in the classroom. What kind of activity do you think would support that? And the Gen AI weighing in and say, here are 5 different examples of how you might see students demonstrate this learning or practice this learning. And so I think for me, that's the biggest trend that I'm seeing is faculty starting to bring the Gen AI a little bit closer to them and really sharing that teaching space with them.
Fantastic. Chris, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the hardest question of all, Robert, because I don't think we have a crystal ball, and this is moving in lots of directions. I think there's the ideal response as to what I hope will happen. And for me, that's obviously in line with what I've already talked about, which is that Gen AI provokes us to think about assessment differently, where we have assessments that are more innovative, that are more linked to students' experiences and connected to more authentic tasks. And that leads to a transformation in the higher education landscape, one that we've been calling for a long time, but we haven't seen mature. But I think that there might be a more likely response, which is we continue with traditional assessment practices and continuously and perpetually chase sort of academic integrity breaches. And I think the direction we end up going in there will depend on how well we support our educators in broadening their assessment literacy. So I hope we collectively can work within a global space, as Amanda suggests, and think about some innovative ways to assess our students.
Oh, that's just fantastic. This has been an excellent conversation. I want to thank you both for sharing your time and your wisdom. Amanda, any last thoughts before we close from you?
I think my biggest recommendation is the one I hand out constantly, and that is try something new. Don't be afraid to try something new and step outside your comfort zone. There's greater value in learning in a crash and burn than in a resounding success. So really nurture that idea around failure can be productive, and just give it a go. What do you have to lose?
Fantastic. Chris, what about you? Final thoughts?
Yeah. When I give talks on AI, this is always a question that comes up. And the advice I give is exactly what Amanda said, which is, try it out for yourself and try to transform your assessment practices. But I also want to end by just reflecting on the fact that new technologies do hit our educational spaces every once in a while. Think about the internet and how that transformed how we teach. And Amanda talking about teaching partners with Gen AI, well, teaching partners with the internet as well. And before that, we had other technologies that influenced how our teaching unfolded within higher education context. And so we are used to, if we zoom out wide enough, technologies influencing our practices. And so let's just remember that history of our educational practice and know that we can confront this and we will adapt and grow with it.
Well, what a fantastic note to end on. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today. So that's a wrap on this episode of the Digital Campus Podcast with eCampus Ontario. Really want to thank you, Chris DeLuca of Queen's University and Amanda Macniak of Durham College for joining me today. We'll include links to examples, news, and other resources mentioned on the show, as well as to Chris and Amanda's socials, so you can connect with them online. Thanks for listening. I'm Robert Luke, and this is the Digital Campus Podcast.
Thank you for joining eCampus Ontario on the Digital Campus Podcast, the show for educators who are shaping the future of higher education in the digital era. If you like the show, please subscribe now and share a link to it with your connections. Visit our website and follow us on X and LinkedIn for more information, tools, and support to successfully navigate digital pedagogy in higher ed for today and tomorrow. Funded by the Government of Ontario.